So, hello everyone. Okay, thank you for being here. Just wanted to share a short story that I made. It's outside of it's not part of that Monos world that I have with the book that I created. So, this is just an entirely on its own short story. And I got the idea from this documentary that I watched about plastic surgery. Anyway, the title of this short story is The Facemaker. And I hope you like it. Inside his favorite house, Inkarin opened almost all of his doors and windows. He thought that it would be good to let the good air come in because that was what he needed. Everything natural. He needed the freshness of the air and didn't think about needing to switch on his air purifier. His friends would have told him he was crazy, indicating a tagline from a commercial. There's effort even in breathing, so make sure that every ounce of air you inhale has the best nutrients in it. If he was one of his friends talking to himself, then this advice will be the same. But he was working on something different. He had to, simply because people will be expecting something different. For 7 years, he had conquered the art scene. Modern, exquisite, simple. They mixed those words together to describe his art. To this day, he wasn't sure why. He was only trying to put in art the things he thought because to keep it in his head was too overwhelming. But then it was a time for hiatus. Or at least that's what marketing had said. Inkarin had produced so many digital art, and in fact had gotten so much money, that people say that he didn't need to create anymore. Of course he knew it can't happen. It was in his veins, plastic covered and not, to create and imagine. Yet to satisfy marketing, he went on a hiatus, at least from the world, not from art. And as he did, he remembered his childhood. He woke up as if it was his first time to do so. He had just gotten his first session under the knife. 14 alterations at one time. And with the size of each alteration, he knew he was pushing the tolerance of what the human face can handle. In a way, he felt lucky. Blessed even, because of the technology that he is living in. 100 years ago, 14 alterations of this magnitude was possible, but it was with risks, high risks, and perhaps risks he understood why people took. He felt his head heavy. Everything was sore. He tried to move, to twitch his nose, but he felt something tickling his nasal canal. If he continued to do that, he might sneeze, and that might actually feel a bit painful, given that his cheeks were in stitches too. He sighed and then he tried to move his lips, but he was feeling a hole of some kind in the right corner of his mouth. He dared not smile, at least physically. In his mind, he was laughing in pain and satisfaction. He stood up and walked a few steps from his recovery bed to the mirror by the wall. He saw himself. He moved his face from side to side. The amount of inflammation was unfathomable, but he looked past that. At least now, in a few days, his parents would be able to start to show him off. Like other people, Inkarin's parents were delighted when he finally reached an age when it was safe to do face making. 8 years old. It was explained to him that a few decades ago, Facemaking was legal only to 12 years of age and above. But parents got around that, faking birth certificates so that clinics can operate on their children. It was one of those things that they turned their blind eye on. Everyone has to face make. Otherwise, what will their standing be in society? Inkring touched his face. The stitches of his childhood had gone, but near his earlobes he felt a short line where the last alteration was made last week. Lucky him, the people had been saying. His face is near perfect that he needed only a few changes to it. He stared at the human-sized screen in front of him. He wanted to make something different, but looking at this monitor that he had used for most of his art pieces, well, it didn't inspire him at all. So he rolled it away. Then he looked at the cabinet at the corner of the room. He went towards it and then opened it. There they were. Canvas, paper, paint, charcoal, neatly organized. His eyes glimmered by the sight and by the thought that he had just had. That he has to use them. He would have to use them all. He needed a table, so he pushed the flattest, widest table he could find in his house towards the cabinet. He then looked for the most appropriate chair, something that when he sits on it, he can overlook the table. He knew, though, that at most times he'll be standing anyway. He then stood against the cabinet trove again. He gave up a deep breath as he moved his hands gently on the things inside, touching some of them, lifting a brush here and there. It was as if he was trying to get to know each one of them. It was as if he was waiting for something to call on to him. And then his left hand landed on a stack of white drawing paper. He moved his fingers against the soft texture of its skin and then gently picked one. On his lower right, he saw charcoal pencils, different sizes, different shapes, different grades. In his mind, he should be getting at least 3, but why would he risk being overwhelmed by 3 different uses, or even more? So he got the simplest, a thick charcoal pencil. He laid both paper and the pencil on the table. He smirked, realizing what a big fuss he had made in getting a table, when clearly it was oversized. But it's okay, he thought. I can eventually have use of that space. He sat on the chair and with charcoal pencil in hand, he began to cover the paper with strokes. He drew a first set of diagonal lines from top left of the paper to the bottom right. He then drew a second set of diagonal lines running from the bottom left of the paper to the top right, intersecting those in the first set. He realized that he was doodling in his own way. He was trying to make the paper look like his drawing monitor preferences. He stopped. He considered it a mistake. He waved his hand on top of the paper and he sighed as he realized that he was treating the medium again like his drawing monitor. "Did you expect the lines to disappear, Inkring?" he asked himself sarcastically. He looked at the lines again. Imperfect. They should disturb him. They were disturbing him. He considered crumpling the paper, but when he ran his fingers on it again, he felt the unique sensation of the texture of the charcoal on the paper. Using the diagonal lines as guide, he began to draw a curve that almost filled up the whole page. He continued until it was clear to him that he was drawing a face. Of course, in any unfamiliar situation, with the mind, at least the human part of it, what it looks for is a human face. That's why we often see eyes on the patterns of the walls, of clothes, or even of clouds. He drew the eyes and then the hair. He touched on the nose. and the mouth. There were no electronic grid lines to guide his illustration, and as expected, the face, as it formed, presented with many more imperfections. No golden ratio considered for the spaces, just a memory that he had before he began his own face making, and just his imagination to guide the lines of the face. When the face was formed, it was that of a girl around 8 years old. He couldn't help but feel a bit of connection to the face, as if it was his as well, but not really. He looked at the eyes, how round they were, but the right eye being a bit smaller, particularly emphasized by the mole to its side. He spent the rest of the day looking at the image, thinking about the girl, wondering what her story was and will be. Inkurin's hiatus lasted 3 years, which was way longer than what marketing wanted it to be. When it was finally over, Inkurin showed them the art pieces. Everything was physical. Nothing was digital. At first, marketing didn't like the approach, thinking that the work should be digitized and made into non-fungible tokens or NFTs. Inkurin refused. Realizing that they can't do anything about it, marketing immediately organized an exhibit and decided to price them way higher than what they had priced any of his works before. The day of the exhibit premiere came. Inkurin was wearing a blue suit with glints of green on its helm. It was one of his best suits and his favorite. In truth, it was the third version of the same kind. The colors reminded him of the sea, and when he wears it, he feels part of the sea. At the door, there were 2 familiar people. It was a man with a woman in his arms. They were his parents. And as they entered the studio, their eyes widened. They walked slowly, and despite showing no emotions on their faces, Inkurin saw the uncertainty in their eyes. "Such a plain-looking girl in all of these works," his mother said in a soft voice when they were finally near him. "Why put her as a subject of the whole show? Don't you think that all this is too much of a risk?" Inkurin gave his mother a soft hug and then whispered to her, "Ma, they're all pre-sold." Again, it was his mother's eyes that gave her surprise away. "Aha!" Inkurin heard from his back. It was his close cousin. They had been friends since they were children. "Now I know the type of beauty you're interested in. Is that why you haven't had a serious relationship?" Inkurin grinned and playfully punched him. "Auntie," his cousin said, "come on, let's look at his works together. Let's try to figure out what was in your son's mind, shall we?" Inkurin's eyes followed his parents and cousin as they walked at the end of the studio. His cousin was on his mother's shoulder and was talking to her non-stop, as if explaining every piece on the wall, as if he knew what they all mean. At the door, an old lady came in. She was wearing a blue elegant dress. It was his grandmother, his favorite relative, as he often told her. And it was true because she always told him stories when he was a child, and she would cook for him even if she didn't have to. Inkurin walked hurriedly towards the entrance. He hugged his grandmother, but when he was about to show her around, Inkurin noticed tears forming in his grandmother's eyes. "Are you okay, Nana?" Inkurin asked. He wasn't sure if his grandmother heard him. She slowly walked towards the largest work in the room. "You got it," she said. Her voice was crackling. "That is the face of my grandmother."